So ladies, gentlemen, fellow 11th Street kids, welcome to my Peacemaker Season 2 finale recap, review, and breakdown. And man, do we have a lot to talk about here. Obviously, not only how things came to a close for Peacemaker and the 11th Street kids this season, but also getting into the thick of the introduction of Salvation and just what is going on there and how this ties into Man of Tomorrow. And finally, after a long time of speculating about Checkmate on the channel, it's now here, and there's things to dive into there, of course. There's quite a lot. I know some people are already saying, oh, well, there isn't a lot, but stick around for this whole video, and I think maybe you'll see how there is quite a bit for me. I mean, this is me after all. BobaTalks, I tend to talk quite a bit, but I think there is quite a bit to think about now with the future of the DCU. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, if you're brand new here and you've enjoyed the Peacemaker videos, you're into DC and you want to see more coverage on the future of the DCU, you're absolutely in the right place. Consider subscribing, and if you go on to enjoy this breakdown, I'd really appreciate a like rating, and if you have it available in your location, consider hitting the hype button. So at the very beginning here, before we get into all the meat of it, this video is timestamped, but we've got a recap to do here. The episode picks up with a flashback to a month ago, and we finally get to see the boat party that's been referenced all season between Chris and Harcourt. So we see them at Big Belly Burger just hanging out, and they're having a really good time together. And their chemistry here, man, it really just works so well. And it's one of the rare times you get to see this side of Harcourt that is really locked away. I was about to say tucked beneath the surface, but I think it's a bit further down than that. And so we get to see them do a bunch of shots and get drunk. Chris prevents Harcourt from beating the crap out of that Freckle guy. I'm just going to call him Freckle guy. And then Chris spots the rock cruise featuring the international superstars Nelson. But this is where that gets cut off until later on in the episode, and we're back in present day, and we're with Chris denying the 11th Street kids from visiting him, but he does have one little visitor sitting outside his cell there, matching right up to the logo of his suit. This is where things start getting pretty interesting. We see Harcourt exploring the QUC with other Argus agents, and they're in full-on documentation mode. Right as we get Otis, one of Lex's top guys, don't forget, he hands notes from Lex Luthor to Rick Flag Sr. about what they found yesterday, so before this episode kind of took place. So Flag is still very much so consulting Luthor about his activities within the QUC. And with what we learn later on, yes, Lex Luthor must be absolutely buzzing. Probably even calls Flag Sr. his best friend with what they have in common now. And I'm kind of itching to get into that. But they report that door 22 is now unlocked, and they go in and see this kind of bricked road of giant candy all over the place. And I have to admit, I didn't really know what to expect from these doorways. I think people were obviously expecting crazy things, but in this moment, they're approached by a bunch of little gremlin-looking things. You know, they looked cute at first, but then a horde of them started taking them all down, and then they start getting pulled away, but these creatures are kind of crafty, and one of them starts slicing the rope. Flurry's helmet even starts getting hugged, shall we say, by one of them. And when Harcourt starts shooting them, they even start bursting out with glitter. So I don't know, what happened on this alternate Earth, or if this is just how Earth evolved in this other dimension. But damn, it was just hectic. And there's nothing left of Klein's face. That was the one thing about all of this exploration, is that Argus agents were being taken out left, right, and center. Then we saw Eagly hiding in the cupboard. I can't see that again. I can't. Meanwhile, with Adrian, I feel like everyone felt that when Adebayo had a go at Adrian for the way he treats his mum. Now, Adebayo managed to kind of manipulate Vigilante into using that money to bail Chris out because he didn't want to use it since it was cursed blood money. Kind of surprised that Chris could even get bailed out. So when Chris gets bailed out, he takes Eagly, leaves town, gets in some hotel somewhere. So this is when they open one of the other doors in the QUC, and within is this black hole, just like the one from Superman. We then get a look at that kind of spider skull Warhammer 40k kind of looking chaos universe. I wasn't expecting crazy things here, but I thought we'd get a little bit of a peek, or maybe a little bit of an exploration in there. But alas, we did not. But it was pretty awesome then seeing a world where a bunch of people are deceased. you could say.
Hey, you know what I'm saying?
As we then see Bordeaux saving the agents just in time from like a horde of zombies. I tried looking at some of the zombies to see if maybe they costumed them after anyone that we may know, but I don't think there was. Now, this is where we start to see Bordeaux just laying there awake in bed while more and more Argus agents are dying, while Rick Flag Sr. is just kind of laughing his ass off with Sydney, and it just seems like the top brass of the situation aren't really giving much of a damn about like the losses, completely disregarding what's happening to their own people. Especially Rick Flag, not interested in the least, like only interested in getting what he wants. Like honestly, after reading the Argus file, it's like this man's whole mindset has completely changed. But ladies and gentlemen, this is when they open another door. And it looks just like their Earth, and it seems that they finally found what they're looking for. We then see Flag Senior presenting the QUC location, or planet rather, Salvation, at the Pentagon. This is when he also reports that Otis and his team have found a way to move directly from their doorway to the doorway in the new planet without needing to go through the QUC first, which makes me wonder if we're really going to see the actual QUC space used in the future. So this is where everything really gets laid on the table, because the Secretary of Defense then wonders if that's where they're building the prison. But Flag responds no. Salvation is the prison, and since they can move the doorway every time they come in and out, the prisoners, won't ever know where they're coming from, and as a result, they're probably never going to be able to get back. And lo and behold, Salvation will be a prison for metahumans. So this addresses what I have been wondering. It's been nagging at me. I've been wondering about this for a while, and that is the whole underlying metahuman threat commentary that I've been talking about in various videos that's been going along across projects now, and this does appear to be the answer. For example, like this was foreshadowed by the Secretary of Defense's comment to Flag at the end of Superman, saying like metahumans are calling the shots now, and through various scenes throughout this season, such as when it was getting reported on the news that things are getting to a point with metahumans that is forcing an urgent response. And my God, is this an urgent response? So yeah, a metahuman prison world. Like, no wonder Luthor and Flag have been getting along pretty damn well with the way Luthor views metas. Flag makes a point of how Arkham and Belle Reve are not capable of holding individuals who have extraordinary abilities, and by the way, with everything we know about Arkham and other facilities in the DC world, can you blame Flag for saying that? I mean, Jesus, like the amount of times people break out, but every single month, someone escapes, and probably more. But here on Salvation, yeah, like, no one will escape. Okay, so let's talk about this. This is pretty huge because Salvation comes from the DC Comics limited series called Salvation Run, where just kind of like really what they're doing here. In the comic run, it's a planet where supervillains are essentially taken and imprisoned, right? Motivations are pretty much similar, such as a growing metahuman threat. Now, in the comics, it was just kind of via a boom tube, but here in the DCU, it's through the QUC. And it also turned out that the planet was a training planet for the new gods. So the concept, whether it's from the comics to the DCU, is extremely similar, but the thing is, this is why we're going to have to do another separate video, like a discussion series episode, to really get into this and the potential of the fallout to come. There's got to be more to, like, the Man of Tomorrow threat, if you will, when it comes to this. Like, sure, Superman, you could argue, will not agree with this, but we know Superman and Luthor are teaming up, reluctantly or whatever, in Man of Tomorrow. Well, against what? Like, sure, we have Salvation, and we'll see more people dropped off there, I'm sure, in Man of Tomorrow, or perhaps by the start of the movie, the world will already have a few new additions in it in the time that has passed from Peacemaker Season 2 to Man of Tomorrow's opening. But what else is happening? I mean, I can't imagine it will just be to merely handle the villains who are ruling the Salvation planet. Because, if you drop off a bunch of metas onto this planet, there's going to be some territory wars and whatnot. And as if Superman's going to go to Luthor and be like, I need your help to liberate these people. Because Luthor will be like, I want them here. So it's going to have to be something else. And we know that this is a contributing tie-in, if you will, to Man of Tomorrow. Now, it would be pretty crazy if dropping off a bunch of metahumans on this world, like, did kind of indeed poke the new gods and kind of got their attention, but I also wonder, you know, this could be a much longer storyline in the DCU that isn't even resolved in Man of Tomorrow. It could still heavily tie in, of course, as obviously there's going to be opinions about all of this from Superman and others who come to learn of it. But the main threat that unites Luthor and Superman together is still, to me, an obvious thing that will still be happening, like something additionally. Now, I'm going to be doing a lot more thinking about this, but as you guys also know, as I always say, adaptations don't copy and paste. So even though this is a DCU where heroes and villains have been about for a very long time, some more than others, of course, and we've yet to see the full status of where some of the more popular ones are at and where their respective rogues gallery is at, but it still will be, like, key word here, adapted. So with all that being said, it will be the concept of salvation, not panel for panel the story, so I wouldn't expect the whole plot to be mirrored precisely. Having said that, though, as well, I am now wondering what if Luthor could get backstabbed by Flag Senior and sent to salvation. I know he's not a metahuman, but he does get sent there in the comic. But we will talk a bit more about salvation later on in this video, because I need to get back on track now, because this is where the Secretary even points out how Flag Senior's come a long way from Lombard Luthor a month ago. If you guys remember, he kind of disagreed with Luthor's perspective on metahumans, to now being the one to proactively implement his plans. Like, for a split second, I was like, wait, is Luthor really just in Flag Senior's body or something? And that's how he's enacting all of this? Because that's how drastically different Flag Senior is acting. But Flag Senior says he doesn't like him, but he is the smartest man in the world, so why not use his brain to make our world a better place? Oh my god, guys, he said brain. You know what that means, Brainiac. I mean, there's a brain on the freaking Man of Tomorrow front page script. You know what this means. At this point, Bordeaux can't really be around Flag anymore, and she calls Harcourt, and she meets her at Big Belly Burger. Now, Bordeaux fills Harcourt in on how the planet is going to be this big metahuman prison, and she's questioning serving this broken system, which is kind of like a lot, you know, with Harcourt's response as well in this moment, like a larger commentary on how they've kind of been doing that for a long time already. So this is where Harcourt says that she needs to meet a friend of hers who has some ideas. And then, boom, Sasha is introduced to Leota Adebayo, and we see them kind of brainstorming. Now, as soon as this started happening, I have to admit, I was like, okay, I think I see where this is going. Also, the other thing that happened wasn't too surprising in how Adebayo would kind of get to a point of understanding that she needs to let Kia go. Now, Harcourt then spots the ticket for the rock cruise, and it takes her back to the night, and Chris is just buzzed in this moment at Nelson performing, and the song starts playing, and Harcourt really starts vibing with it, but then Chris steps it up, takes her hand, and time even like freezes for a moment. I really appreciated that shot there. And this is when they kiss. And in that moment, like the very briefest of moments, she allows herself to be at her most vulnerable. But before Harcourt lets herself run with that for too long, we see that she leaves, and you know, that was the extent of the night that, you know, has been referred to all season. So no wonder why Chris has been wondering about this all season. It's kind of like, we had a moment, Harcourt, like, come on. So this is when the 11th Street kids finally locate Peacemaker, and he insists that he's leaving for just Vigilante to then tackle the crap out of him, taser him. It's like, my god. They then tell him that they refuse to let him go, and he says that he's cursed, as in he legitimately believes, like, since we're in a world where magic exists, like, I think I'm actually cursed. But that moment when Adebayo confronts Chris about his losses, speaking sense into him, it was just so good. Hearing her point out these things to him about how his past isn't his fault. He was always listening to someone else, whether that be his father, whether that be Waller, during the Suicide Squad. But when he's just himself, none of those cursed things happen. And if anything, when he's himself, he touches all the hearts of the people around him. But like, overall with this scene, Danielle Brooks is just incredible. I know I'm stating the obvious here, but she's just great. I mean, everyone was good in this scene, but Danielle Brooks really just is like, you know, arguably, other than, yeah, the show being called Peacemaker, and there's a lot of other things going on, she's kind of the heart of the show in many ways. Because without her, what would this show really be?
You're big and you're stupid. but I know you love me.
So this is when Harcourt points out they've all been listening to someone else, whether that's Flag, Waller, Argus in general. Screw them all. They're going to do something for them and for the world and stand up together. But they obviously want Peacemaker with them. So we're getting right at the end of the episode now, where it kind of like wraps things up in a bit of a montage-y kind of way. Chris in this moment asks Harcourt about the boat again, if it meant anything. And she finally admits that, of course, it meant everything. And that just hit, like Foxy Shazam then starting to play such a, I don't know if people feel differently. I'm not saying people didn't like it, but obviously getting a new intro, a new song takes some getting used to. But I just love this song so much. And seeing him just dance and, being so happy, having that acknowledged now finally. We then get that moment with the party boat a week later, featuring Foxy Shazam, of course. And Chris and Harcourt are in attendance. And as they said over on the Peacemaker podcast episode, it really is kind of Harcourt's song. She was absolutely loving it. And seeing that was very fulfilling as a fan of this show. Do you know what I mean? Like, seeing the journey so far, the more introspective time for the characters this season culminate in a moment like this. We then get the montage of them taking Vigilante's money, setting up the new office with Adebayo. It kind of felt weird to have them all there walking down like, yeah, this is our new thing with Bordeaux there. But not just Bordeaux, but they've also recruited Langston Fleury and Judo Master. So there's me thinking that maybe something was off with Bordeaux. And ironically, I was thinking and even saying that what if she's already in Checkmate? And it was this kind of secret thing that Waller already had going on in the background, despite facing these congressional hearings. Waller being Waller, maybe she had that going on. But nope, Sasha's just now a part of the origin of Checkmate, which of course rings kind of true to the comics, even though she's being adapted a bit differently here. And my God, like Fleury and Adrian, a combination I never even considered. And now they're office neighbors, if you will. I just think Fleury and Vigilante are going to be this cocktail of absolute comedic gold. I've really enjoyed Tim Meadows this season. Vigilante, everyone kind of loves Vigilante, so yeah, I wonder what this is going to be like one day. And man, I loved seeing Eagly appreciate Economos clipping his nails, and you can tell it really hit Economos. Gunn did say on the podcast breakdown for the episode that he felt like he needed to have that moment there because of what's about to happen. Because he needs people to know that Eagly has a home and somebody else he's starting to love a little bit besides Chris. Which makes sense because obviously, yeah, now Chris is stuck in a different dimension. We then all see them walk out of Adebayo's office, or should I say, Checkmate, making the world better. It was kind of like, I kind of knew it, but well, technically I didn't. I mean, I've been seeing Checkmate, as I've said, coming for ages, but I genuinely thought it would be more of a pitch for the Waller show. But some of you guys did suggest in the previous weeks that, what if Adebayo's thing turns out to be bigger, and perhaps she could kind of do a checkmatey thing. So the idea has been floating out there, and it's obviously this new iteration in this adaptation of Checkmate, as opposed to the comics where Checkmate was something that evolved from Waller's involvement in the group known as the Agency, linking in all kinds of other characters. I don't know if we're going to get Mr. Terrific in it, because Mr. Terrific's in the Justice Gang, but I do think there's going to be all of this interconnectivity there with maybe more interesting comic book opportunities that could still be adapted to the DCU. Like, I can still imagine that the hierarchy of Adebayo's group will be modeled after chess. So having kings and queens as leaders, and I can imagine dialogue like that in the future. Perhaps Vigilante is a knight alongside Peacemaker. And I can imagine Gunn would have a kick out of having Economos complain about being called one of the pawns. You also know that Checkmate will absolutely oppose what Flag Senior and Argus is doing, and maybe, just maybe, Waller can help out Adebayo gain larger connections, because we know that Checkmate has the funding behind it, but where do they go from there? Like, how do they magically get gigs now, or like onto something mission-wise? Because this is something I was thinking about. Just because Adebayo's gone from her mercenary business with no business to this, they don't magically become a busy enterprise, or agency rather, overnight. Sure, maybe with Fleury leaving Argus, Bordeaux leaving Argus, and others joining it, with more members to come, perhaps that means more connections and more legitimacy will be earned for people to look at them like a reputable agency. But yeah, ultimately interested to see how this plays out. I'm wondering, could this be its own show? Could this be the secret project that Gunn was on about? Remember that project that I was thinking, what if it's a Justice Gang continuation? Well, you could have something. I know some people would be like, but this is kind of like a masked Peacemaker, but not necessarily. You could genuinely set up a new show, Checkmate. You have an all-new cast, maybe even more cast members coming in to join the agency. I am now really wondering if that is the project, the secret project that nobody knows about, with, as Gunn said, he was talking about multiple superheroes in it. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that. But this is when we see Peacemaker get kidnapped by Argus agents and brought before Flag Sr. And they want him to be the first person to go to Salvation. And so he's cast in there, they cut away the doorway, and don't forget, like, they have full control. Like, you never know where the door is going to appear next. And seriously, it's like kind of like in this moment, like, damn, Flag really is the villain now. But even then, like, it is a complicated one. I think for Flag, even though technically Peacemaker isn't a metahuman, his stance has changed from the Pentagon scene in Superman on metahumans, because after coming more hands-on with Peacemaker and resenting him so much, maybe he just projects that anger onto the larger metahuman community, and that is a way to solve it. Because yeah, it's absolutely guaranteed that there's metahumans out there who are committing atrocities in the DCU. Not every single one, but it's easy to probably put them all into one box with his motivations. I guess the only thing for me that I'm wondering about is Flag Sr. was already the head of Argus during Superman and would have already have read the Peacemaker file, and yet was still opposed to Luthor's Planet Watch pitch in the Pentagon and his view on metahumans. So like, what is it that changed for him during that time when he already hated Peacemaker? Again, as I said earlier, is it just coming face to face with his son's killer, and he's kind of like, any costumed clown, meta or non-meta, just probably would be best gotten rid of over at Salvation? But that's, you know, pretty extreme. Now, while Peacemaker is trapped on Salvation, he starts hearing all of these noises of what's going on in the trees and just surrounding him, sounding like some weird creatures. And we know from the comics that Salvation is full of dangerous threats and beasts, so there's all of this potential for fun things there. That's not just metas being threats to other metas dropped off on the planet. But speaking of other metas, man, I am still wondering what the main obstacle will be in Man of Tomorrow. Like, I want to stress, Salvation is, I think, a huge component to this and invites a lot in, but there still needs to be that central target locked into, so to speak. And the issues of the Salvation run lean into a lot, whether that's from characters like the Joker to the Brain and Monsieur Marla, Grodd, even Vandal Bloody Savage. So let me know, do you think the threat will be native to Salvation, or do you think it will be something else, all while the Salvation stuff is still cooking at the same time, and it kind of all then ties in together? Like, what did the Brain on Gunn's script mean? Are you still thinking about Brainiac? Now, as for James Gunn's explanation for the Man of Tomorrow connection, we had this user say over on Threads, can you please clarify, how is that finale gonna set up Man of Tomorrow? Like, I'm genuinely very confused about this. And Gunn says, where Chris is at the end, what is happening between the government and the metahumans, Rick and Lex's new partnership, and all of their decision to do what they did is all a part of the future, Man of Tomorrow, and more. So again there, very much so ties into Man of Tomorrow, but also to a larger overarching story in the DCU, which is why I mentioned earlier, it might not all be resolved in the Lex Luthor and Superman team up. It might just be the beginning of something much, much bigger that will span quite a few projects in Chapter 1. So ladies and gentlemen, got quite a bit to say now, like overall thoughts on the episode, but also, you know, the finale, the setup, other people's thoughts on it. You know, I would say, first of all, that I had a good time with the finale. For me, as I keep saying with Season 2 compared to Season 1, where you had a lot of comedy still cut with emotion, Season 2 served that up again, but in a much more introspective way for the characters. Like, the character arcs also culminated at a point that felt satisfying to me. And seeing just the payoff of the boat party in the past and now the present with Foxy Shazam, absolutely for me, like the legwork throughout the season to make those moments feel earned, felt earned for me. Now, of course, when it comes to this, as much as some people may not want to see it right now, the finale progressed the DCU forward. And just on that larger note, when it comes to setting up Man of Tomorrow, I know some people are going to be disappointed because they didn't get something more, and that something more is hard to put a precise description on because it's a bit different for everybody. But you watching right now, there's a chance you probably already know what I mean by that. So this is why I've been saying that I was going to temper my expectations, just because I don't think it's really ever a good thing to be like, right, man, we're going to have Brainiac detect the QUC energy signature that will lure him to Earth. He's going to be on screen, all while Peacemaker's high-fiving Superman in the QUC, while Martian Manhunter is introduced for the first time by watching them in the corner eating a bag of Chocos. Sometimes it's like, unless people get something like that, then it's just concluded as nothing happened or bad. Now, having said that, I don't want to come across like I'm deliberately trying to invalidate people genuinely thinking like, man, like I thought there would be this or that, though. So I do totally understand why some people might have wanted more, I don't know, novelty things or like some kind of cameos, so to speak, because that's the thing. When things are hyped up, they often evolve in our minds with the whole kind of fan goggles thing. So if you've got your fan goggles on, things can get pretty huge with the expectation meter being dialed right on up. I mean, for crying out loud, people were thinking just because the finale was titled Full Nelson, that meant Kent Nelson, aka Dr. Fate, was arriving. And that is just the first rung on the ladder of speculation people had. So that kind of paints a picture there, right? And sure, James Gunn hyped up the finale, which I also don't blame him for doing because it's the finale of his show. For him, that's an exciting thing in of itself. I also think certain quotes were a bit over-amplified, if you will, such as the ones that were taken from interviews at a time where Gunn talks about bigger stars being in the show, which was just likely referring to Nicholas Holt's Luthor and Joel Kinnaman's Rick Flag Jr. But that's not the sole reason, because as for Gunn's teasers of the connections to Man of Tomorrow, I mean, he said that the whole Salvation thing, this Metahuman prison world, and Luthor's partnership with Rick Flag Sr. to the creation of Checkmate and all of that will be crucial to Man of Tomorrow and beyond. And now we've got the seeds of that story still yet to come, whereas before, we literally didn't. We didn't have any of that. I think I do prefer something like that compared to, let's say, Booster Gold nonsensically flying into the QEC because why? Blue Beetle just flying in being like, have you seen Ted Kord? Because why? Like, how does this tie in? Like, how would those be relevant? Sure, it's like the comic book fan equivalent of eye candy, but it's just like, as Gunn has said before, they'd kind of just be forced in for the sake of it, like cameo porn, not really serving a purpose. But Salvation, what Rick Flag's doing, the partnership with Lex Luthor, this, that, and the other, that is serving a purpose. But with all that aside, I'm just wondering, again, I know I've said it quite a few times, but why would Flag, I assume it's Flag, right? 'Cause, you know, Luthor's in prison still. Why would he facilitate a team up between Superman and Luthor? Is it something from Salvation that gets out of hand? Other things that I was thinking about in this episode, I was right in my prediction that we wouldn't really go to Earth X. I always thought of the whole Keith thing with the way things were left off there. It's like, well, I'm now in kind of Peacemaker's Rogues Gallery and I will stop at nothing to get revenge, but for another day. Like, headcanon, Keith is out there coming for Peacemaker, but did we need to see Earth X and Keith in this episode? Not really, I don't think so. So I'm quite okay with not including that, but I know quite a few people wanted to see more Earth X things in the finale. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that is everything that I've got to say about the Peacemaker finale for now. I will be doing a separate discussion series video, so don't forget to leave your thoughts, your theories, your questions, anything you want to see highlighted and featured in that video down in the comments below. I'm very much so looking forward to reading anything you have to say. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed the video, you know what I'm going to say. I'd appreciate appreciate you hitting that like and maybe the hype button if you have it available. Consider subscribing, of course, for more DCU videos just like this. News updates, theory videos, all kinds of things like that. But until next time, again, just thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow 11th Street kids in the next video. Goodbye.